Hey everyone! I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story of almonds today, and I hope you're listening up close because I know a lot of people love almonds. I have a huge bag here with me today myself from Costco. Thanks, Dad. And they're really healthy. They've got protein, they've got antioxidants, they've got a lot of vitamins and minerals in them, and they're a healthy snack, right? So where do they come from and what's their story? The almond brands like Blue Diamond almonds, they'll have like support honeybees on the container and stuff, and I think that's really great because it turns out almonds do really rely on honeybees. And why is that? Well, I'm going to get into that a little bit later, but first of all, almonds are thought to have originated from somewhere in the Middle East. They're mentioned in the Bible. They evolved probably about 5 million years ago, and the original plant is kind of a dainty, fragile little plant, basically to make them into these huge trees that then we grow into in orchards. We actually graft them onto a peach rootstock. So people can do that with plants and crops. They basically will graft, meaning that they basically grow part of the plant on another part of the plant, and then it takes on the properties of that sturdier, hardier plant. It's pretty cool. So they do that with almonds to make them hardier and larger and maybe more productive. I'm not sure. But they get sprayed with a plethora of fungicides and pesticides, and they spray the entire surrounding area with herbicides to prevent anything else from growing on the ground around the plants. They have these humongous orchards, and they only grow them in the United States in California. And they're grown elsewhere in the world, but they do well in the sort of Mediterranean climate that California has. And California exports most of the almonds that they grow, mostly to Europe, and they produce 80% of the world's almonds, which is kind of crazy. And there's about 800,000 acres of almonds in California. So the Central Valley of California, which is sort of this huge area where they grow a lot of crops, especially almonds, they're growing in the central inner part of the state. An almond tree produces nuts after about 5 years. It'll last about 25 years. The nut is a stone fruit. That's one of the fruits like peaches or plums, or think of those things that have like that big stone in the middle. That's actually what the almond is. We have these huge machines that actually just come along and shake the trees, and so we don't need like individual people out there hand picking. They just shake these trees a whole bunch, and then the almonds come to the ground. They dry there in the sun for like 1 to 2 weeks, and then the start of the harvest begins, which then ends in October. And I'm not sure how they get them off the ground, if they use people or if they use some sort of machine. But I guess almonds, the case is that they actually don't need as many human laborers as they do for other crops like peaches and cotton and things that they used to grow really commonly in California, that they don't anymore. One, because it's cheaper to hire less people to grow almonds, to labor, and then also almonds are really profitable. You can make a lot of money off of almonds because people will pay a good amount. They're not cheap. No nuts are cheap. They used to grow all kinds of grapes and apricots in California, but they don't anymore. They switched over to almonds. A lot of the farmers did. Also, the almonds are less perishable than these other fruits and things are. The pollination demands of an almond. If you're just using like the wind and a few volunteer wild pollinators, you can expect about 40 pounds per acre of almonds. If you put honeybees nearby, you can get about 2,400 to 3,000 pounds per acre compared to 40 pounds per acre. So that's a pretty striking difference. So you can see how important the honeybee is to the almond. In the 1970s, it was about $12 a hive to rent honeybees at almond farms. And in 2010, it was about $150 to $200 per hive to rent them. So that price has gone up enormously in the past 40 years. And in the Beekeeper's Lament, which is what a lot of this information comes from, it's a really great book by Hannah Nordhaus, and she writes that quote, are expected to function like yet another farm machine, but they are living things with short lifespans. We basically treat bees like a machine, or they are essentially like any other kind of managed species, like cattle or goats or whatever, agricultural managed domesticated species. And that's part of the reason why they are suffering the way that they are and declining at such alarming rates, and why it's so expensive for beekeepers to keep them now. They're facing so many problems, and part of it is just that we subject them to very difficult living conditions. So in the case of almonds, for instance, we truck like 99%, estimated 99, 95, 90 something percent of the nation's hives out to California to pollinate almonds in February when they start to flower. And so we truck them like, thousands of miles, which is already an unnatural thing for them to be doing, put them under stress, and then we put them and plot them in these almond orchards where the only thing for miles and miles and miles is almonds. It's one type of crop, and they're sprayed with all kinds of crap, like I said, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, creating this like toxic cocktail that these animals just are forced to deal with. And on top of that, we've introduced the varroa mite into the United States, which has just caused so many problems. It's basically this little mite that you can think of it like a tick. It just sucks all the blood out of little bees, baby bees, and wreaks all kind of havoc in honeybee hives and other pests and diseases that we've introduced into honeybees. But then we, plop them in front of an almond orchard, and the way that we farm now, we tend to farm in monocultures. So basically there's one type of crop for miles and miles and miles, and acres and acres and acres, because that's the more sort of efficient way to do it. We're able to just, run a tractor and harvest one type of crop, which is easier in some ways than having multiple types of crops and harvesting at different times of the year, or having to use different equipment, or having to hand harvest, or whatever it may be. So the way that people typically farm now is these giant monocultures. And what monocultures sort of encourage, in a way, is also a huge number of pests, because if you can imagine a certain kind of insect that really, really likes any kind of crop, like, I don't know, say you're in a watermelon field, you've got one type of pest that really, really likes watermelon. It's just got a giant feast, so it's able to increase in number, versus if it's in a field like what's called a polyculture, which with multiple types of crops, that watermelon pest can only go so far until it reaches potato, and then it's like, oh, I don't like potato, I'm not gonna eat here, so it's just gonna stick to the watermelon, and so it's not able to like boom in population numbers as much as in a monoculture. What that means is that when you have such a huge number of pests, you have to apply a ton of pesticides, and that's what people have used in order to deal with the number of pests that typically they're dealing with in monocultures. So yeah, we subject these honeybees to all these different conditions, basically force them to only feed off of one type of food source for a particular time of the year, when they are actually adapted to feeding their young on several different types of plants. They do better when they have a variety of different pollen species that they feed their young, which means that they're getting different kinds of amino acids and different vitamins and minerals that are found in pollen from different plants versus just one type of plant. The whole almond industry is part of the issue with the honeybee decline, and unfortunately that's how it is for a lot of crops though, and not many farms are grown in polyculture. We have multiple types of crops growing, and not many farms are organic, but that's sort of the wave of the future, I believe, and I think that the way that we farm right now just isn't sustainable. It will crash at some point if we don't change the way that we farm, and So yeah, so that's the story with almonds in a very basic way. I hope that was interesting to someone or informative. And please put any questions or comments you might have, and have a great day.